Welcome. If I could ask you to take a seat and begin to focus your attention this direction. That worked. Wonderful. For those of you who don't know me, most of you do, but apparently this is a good practice for those who may be watching this as it's taped. I am Beth Dobkin, the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at St. Mary's College, and I'm honored to host this event. I would like to begin with thanking my staff because all of the details here, the recording, the food, the wine, everything is due to Gloria Janis and Lori Bowen. So thank you to them. Dave Bowen has been a commanding figure since arriving here in the 70s when he was recruited away from California Public Employee Relations Project at the Institute of Industrial Relations at Cal to start the first executive MBA program in Northern California here at St. Mary's College. He quickly worked to set us on the stage to make graduate business successful, and this is a quote, by getting people to do what needs to be done. Dave has become a master of that, of navigating bureaucracy, of getting people to do what he wants, but more importantly, in ways that they may not understand or realize. This seems to be a particular strength of Dave's, understanding people, leadership, and not only what needs to be done, but how to do it with compassion, integrity, and skill. His teaching has been described as exemplary and empathetic, and he has opined himself on the challenge of teaching, particularly professional business people. Because of their experience, Dave has said, it's hard to waltz in with a bucket full of theory and make them happy. But he does. Linda Herkenhoff writes that taking her first organizational behavior class with Dave changed the direction of her career. She even had him sign her textbook when she first showed up as a professor at St. Mary's. Dave is a distinguished past editor of the journal Industrial Relations, and he's published extensively in the area of employee relations. He has also co-authored with colleagues, helping them to advance their scholarly careers as well as contributing to his own. A few of his notable achievements: a longtime chair of rank and tenure, that is an achievement. He's been not only the graduate business director, but undergraduate department chair, and he's done all this while being described as kind-hearted, a terrific colleague, great listener, generous and accommodating, always giving colleagues the benefit of the doubt, friendly, warm. One quote that I particularly liked: Dave finds his rewards in unassumingly doing a good job, without seeking to be acknowledged or thanked for it. In the stresses of day-to-day pressures, we take his support for granted, be it in dealing with troubles in the classroom, revising our Form A during rank and tenure submissions, or the debates in faculty meetings. His willingness to consider all points of view, his ability to listen empathetically, his patience to educate and inform to bring all sides together, and the gentle charm and humor by which his wisdom strengthens the institution makes him a real treasure for everyone at St. Mary's. Yes, Dave, I'm going to go on. Not done yet. Dave loves golf and movies, though one colleague says Dave remembers only the bad shots. We're giving this opportunity to you, Dave, so that you can celebrate with us all the good shots, the things that really matter, the profound effect you've had on your students, your colleagues, and this community. The most striking expression of support to me comes from the following quote, which really brings together the power of Dave's presence, the regard we all have for the wisdom he embodies, and the care of this community. Dave is a man of action who quietly does many things. Providing him the Professor of the Year platform will be a good way to get Dave to reflect on his life's work and offer his wisdom in his own words, rather than by exemplary action or other people's experiences. Please give Dave and us, the listeners, this opportunity. I'm thrilled to be able to give this opportunity on behalf of the college and all those who have supported Dave's nomination. It's a wonderful moment, and I enjoy you to sit back and enjoy his presentation, Parenting Amid Schizophrenia, What My Son and Daughter Have Taught Me. Dave Bowen.
Okay. Did you turn it on? You has it on? Okay. Well, I got to get up on this stage. Hi, and thanks for coming. If you ever find yourself with your ego kind of, floating along the bottom of the floor, just make sure or arrange to have Beth introduce you sometime. Thank you, Beth. That was marvelous. I want to introduce some people from my family, my extended family, my lateral family. My son and daughter, Dave and Karen, which we're going to be talking about in a minute. Their mother is here, and I was delighted, Sandra, for your decision to come. She's with her friend Michelle. They're very good friends. My sister is here, Terry, and her husband, Don. Huh? You want me to stand up? Oh, stand up. My sister's the one on the right, by the way. And Sharon and I have been together for a long time. Stand up. All right. We've been together as companions and friends, and a support team for a long time. I owe her a lot, and she just told me to shut up. So, all right. When I was trying to figure out what kind of topic to talk about, it crossed my mind I might want to talk about mental illness and schizophrenia because both of my children suffer from it. And I've been kind of an advocate in volunteer work and so on for a long time, but I decided against it and picked another topic, a more academic topic, something I felt everybody would be interested in because of its relevance to the college. And then I was having lunch sometime this summer with Barry Eckhouse, wherever he is. There he is. And he said, as a past professor of the year, he knew all you think about for the whole year is giving this bloody talk. What are you going to talk about? So I told him about a topic that I had worked on and thought about a little bit and started some, a little bit of research about, and he listened, and being the rhetorician he is before anything else, he asked me, what do you think your audience wants? What do you think they want to hear? What's your main points? How do you want to wind up? And I did my best to respond. Towards the end, I kind of was just making it up as I was going along. And he did something that was really meaningful to me. He held up his hand like this. And he said, David, you don't want to talk about that. Talk about your kids. And Barry knows both of my kids fairly well, and he probably knows more about my life and schizophrenia than anybody else at the college. So I thought about it, and I thought, he's right about that, so that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. I want to talk about three things, basically. A little bit about the illness itself. What is it? What are the symptoms? Just so we have a place to start. I'll go through that very rapidly because many of you are familiar with the disease, and none of this will be new to you. But I want to get it out there because it's a nice preamble for what I want to talk about thereafter, which is 2.6 million people in the United States suffer from schizophrenia. It's a lot of people. Where are they? Where do they live? Who treats them? Who cares about them? And as a society, what are we doing about them? That's probably what I'm interested in most, and where I spend most of my volunteer time is around what we offer them in the way of support and encouragement. Then I want to talk about a more current topic that I think it's going to get a lot more play, which is the link between schizophrenia and violence. There's some evidence out there that violence among schizophrenics, perpetrated by schizophrenics, is increasing. And I want to say a little bit about that because I have some real strong convictions about it. And then I want to wind up with a few observations about the impact of my children and caring for them and me. Why do I feel like I'm a hell of a lot better, excuse me for the little colloquial speech, but why do I think I'm a better person? A heck of a lot better person because of what I've learned from them. Because I really do feel that way. All right. My daughter is 53 years old. Now, if I can get this thing to work. There she is. She's 53 years old. She fell ill in her sophomore year of college at a liberal arts institution in the Midwest. So therefore, she's a member of the 70% of people with schizophrenia who are diagnosed between the ages of 17 and 24. We're not really sure why it happens in that gap, but it frequently does. My son, there he is. Oh, there he was. There he is. He's 51 years old. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was 20, after about 3 years of drift and puzzlement for his mother and I. What's going on with him? How did he change? How did he become a whole different person? What's going on? And I'm going to allow my son to give us a definition of schizophrenia, because it's just as good as any of the other ones in the literature. I asked him once, how would you define well, I'll talk about that in a little while. And his definition is, well, Dad, your brain just doesn't work like it's supposed to. And it drives you crazy sometimes. That was a terrific definition. What are the symptoms of schizophrenia? Alteration of the senses. The senses become profound in the sense that their intensity increases. Colors sometimes are much more vivid. Noise, speech is louder than it is in normal circumstances. This happens most often early in the disease. Towards the end of the disease, many people with this illness end up with flattened affect, it's called. They just withdraw into themselves. And I'm beginning to see a little bit of that in my son, and it's hard to see. Delusions and hallucinations, right? Auditory hallucinations, hearing voices, very common with this illness. Most of the people with schizophrenia that I've interacted with hear voices. What are they hearing? They're hearing actual voices. They're loud. They're frequently critical. They frequently, for reasons we don't understand, have religious undertones, religious implications. They're denunciatory often. It's hard sometimes to imagine when I'm with my daughter especially, because hearing voices was particularly characteristic of her symptoms. It's hard to imagine how she copes. Visual hallucinations. What was that? A beautiful mind, right? A beautiful mind notwithstanding, are fairly uncommon in the disease. When we look at a tree and somebody with schizophrenia looks at a tree, it's the same tree. If the sufferer may look at the tree and look at the branches and wonder, wow, they're configured in a way, how come they look like that? And why is that tree there instead of over here? So they give fanciful expressions about the tree, but they see the same tree we do. Disorders of mood are very common. Inappropriate affect, it's called. My daughter, Sandra, you remember this, for a couple of years, remember when she would cackle out of nowhere? She'd just have this most delightful, infectious cackle, laugh. Didn't know why. Nothing was funny. She didn't know why she was experiencing that emotion, but it was hilarious. It was a wonderful sound, and I got to the point where I was just waiting for it, and it usually would come. More often than not, the inappropriate affect is sadness and crying, feeling sad and moody. And certainly that's been true for my daughter as well. Disorders of mood we've talked about. All right, so these are the main categories of symptoms. The one that makes it the hardest for people with this disease are the fact that you cannot discriminate against incoming stimuli. I'll be talking with my daughter, and she's doing fine, and then she's gone. I can see she's not paying attention. And the reason is because she's listening to the air conditioner that's making a funny sound. She's interested or hearing a hallway conversation down the hall somewhere, the wind against the window. The brain just lets it all in. And people with the disease can't seem to discriminate the sounds. They can't focus on what's important that's coming in. So it makes it incredibly hard for them to concentrate and focus and the rest of it. Okay, causes. What causes this disease? Nobody really knows still. We have more information about the differences between the brains of people with schizophrenia and those of the general population than we've ever had. We've amassed a ton of data. So there's no doubt that it's a disorder of the brain. There was a period in U.S. history where that was not the case, but it is a disorder of the brain. We know that. We know the regions of the brain that it affects because of imaging and the technology advances that have occurred in the last 10, 15 years. But why it happens? 6 or 7, take your pick. Nutritional theories, chemical imbalance theories, theories of neurotransmitters, genetic theories. There is a genetic contribution to schizophrenia. It does run in families, but we've been looking for the gene that codes for schizophrenia now, as you know from the daily press, for about almost the last decade. Can't find it, so it probably doesn't exist. So it's probably a combination of genes that contributes to the development of the disease. The one that impresses me the most is infectious agents. A virus of some kind interferes with the development of the brain. There's a theory that explains Sandy and I and our experience of our children, and it's during pregnancy. It's called the second trimester theory. Second trimester is when the brain develops the most. The biggest development occurs in pregnancy in the second trimester. It's hard not to think that therefore there's something goes wrong. Something happens in that second trimester. And and Sandra had a very difficult pregnancy both times. She had difficulty retaining weight. She was experiencing nausea every single day. And her GP at the time I was so stupid, I didn't know enough, and it was the family doctor they had faith in, Dr. Whitty, remember? And so there's things we could have done, but I wish we had, but we didn't. And I think there's probably something went wrong during those pregnancies because of all the drugs she was taking and her inability to gain weight and so on. But nobody knows. We really don't know. There's 2 or 3 other theories, but there's no reason to go into them. Okay, now I want to turn to the second thing. Where do these 2.6 million people live? How do they live? What kind of lives do they have? And that's always interested me. This population is highly mobile and transient. Those of you, and I know several of you, who have experience in their families with schizophrenia, they're in a board and care, then they're in a subacute, then they're in the hospital, then they're on the street, then they come back to board and care. So trying to get a handle on where they are at any one point in time is very difficult. I remember the director of the federal agency, what was it, the National Institutes of Health, some sub-agency that deals with major mental illness. The director was before a Senate panel answering questions about how we deal with major mental illness in this country. And this director was asked, where are they, where they live, and so on. And he says, well, we know where about 60% of them are, but the other 40% we have no clue. And I think that's pretty darn accurate. My son has lived in 19 different residences, no, 22 now. 22 different residences since he was diagnosed. He's 51, diagnosed at 20. And that includes periods of living with me and living with his mother, and the rest of the time living in board and care homes, subacute hospitals. Once, for about a month, might as well have been living in the streets for all the care he was getting. My daughters lived in 14 different places. Each of those, each time they had times when they were living independently. My daughter was in a house that I managed to squeeze together and purchase, and she had a boyfriend, and he was OCD for another major mental illness, and they were making it go and worked fine for Sandra, what, 3 or 4 years? Something like that, and then it fell apart. My son lived on Proctor Avenue in Santa Rosa in an independent living situation with 3 other people with the disease. Social workers would drop by once or twice a week. I'd come over and see what I could do the laundry, bring some groceries. And he made that work for 6 or 7 years, and then didn't. So there's about 10% of the population, estimates are, that are in jails and prisons. I mean, that's where they might as well live. Let me see, there's one other category. Oh, 10% are homeless of that 2.6 million. And a couple of other random facts. You know, I could have put all this stuff on a PowerPoint, but I don't like PowerPoint. 23% of state prisons, or of the prisoners in state prisons, are schizophrenic. No, that's not right. They take antipsychotic medication, 23%. Now, if you are wealthy, you can have anything you want in the way of care. There's very few private pay because it is extraordinarily expensive. The least expensive I could find was $45,000 a year, and McLean's probably to the top of the line. It was $100,000 a year. Insurance plans pay very little for any kind of treatment. If you're under an insurance plan, typically the insurance itself it's written in such a way that they're in there for a couple of weeks, and then the physician, under the contractual agreement with the insurance company, finds that a lower level of care will work just fine. They don't need this high level of care. And so it's, I don't know if anybody saw the special on 60 Minutes about a month ago, talking about the interaction of insurance plans and schizophrenia and mental hospitals. It was really hard to get through. 30% of the homeless, did I say this? 30% of the homeless have a major mental illness. They may have a co-occurring disease, alcoholism, substance abuse, but the underlying cause is a major mental illness. Okay, let me with that kind of very broad survey, talk a little bit about what's going on with the link between schizophrenia and violence, because those of us in the mental health community who are interested in this kind of thing are a little bit frightened. The best example I can give, I think, is in the 50s, there were 2 or 3 surveys of the public with the question, everyone who has schizophrenia is potentially dangerous, and therefore you should avoid them. 35% of Americans expressed or gave that response. In this was about 2006 actually, about 9, 10 years ago, that figure was 65%. So the public's perception, we're afraid, is starting to shift, re-stigmatizing the illness, right? Oh, can't go near them, they're scary, scary things. The best survey I've seen of this stuff is the following, and I put this together from 2 or 3 sources. "90% of people with schizophrenia are no more dangerous than the general population." I think that's true. And a big reason, as I'll explain in a minute, is because they are under treatment and under medication. 10% are potentially violent, meaning there are indications in their histories, their psychiatry records, county records, family discussions are potentially violent. 10% means they might be capable of violence, but there's no indication of actual violence yet. 1/10 of that 10% has a history of violence. Homicide, stabbings, slugging, fights, and so on. So the mental health community talks about the 10 of 10, meaning the 10% of the 10%, because that's the target population for preventing violence. Okay, to understand what that means, and if it is shifting, and we want to do something about homicides and violence and so on among untreated schizophrenics, you can't do that without understanding the history of society's engagement with schizophrenia. I think it was, let me just make sure I've got the right figure here. 1960, 500,000 people in the United States were confined in state mental institutions. This is what we used to call insane asylums. 500,000 people in 1960. In 2007, around in there somewhere, there's 40,000 in state hospitals. That's a massive shift in just a couple of decades. They all left the hospital. In order to understand why that happened, why that massive shift, there's 2 or 3 reasons. One is exposés of the conditions in state mental hospitals in the 30s and 40s and 50s, horrifying conditions, unbelievable treatment in those hospitals. And the public was just disgusted and began screaming and yelling and saying, we can't treat human beings this way. And the response was, well, maybe we ought to just empty them out and figure out some other way to treat them. Then there was a shift in our perception of the causes of schizophrenia. It's interesting that around the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, Bueller especially was a very well-known psychiatrist who was interested in mental illness and so on. And he called it a disorder of the brain. It was understood to be a disorder of the brain. And then our understanding as a society shifted in the 40s and 50s to, I'm being very crude here, overgeneralizing, but the Freudians got involved in it, and psychoanalysis, and the analytic community, and all of a sudden we had these theories of schizophrenia that were hard to understand at this point. Thomas Sabbs wrote a book called The Myth of Mental Illness, in which he argued, very popular book, in which he argued that schizophrenia didn't really exist. They were sane and the rest of us were insane, that kind of silliness. Theodore Litz wrote several books on the psychodynamics of the family, holding mothers and fathers and responsible for the development of the illness. I remember reading this literature early when Karen was first diagnosed and saying, that can't possibly be true. This one article talked about schizophrenic mothers and distant fathers who abandoned the family. And, oh my God, the methodology was just awful. But Hollywood climbed on with films, about psychoanalytic solutions for schizophrenia. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. I don't know if that rings any bells. It was both a very popular book and changed a lot of minds, and a film. And then Jack Nicholson got involved. Remember? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. A great film, but Didn't have anything to do with schizophrenia. And the third thing was civil rights in the 60s. The ACLU was very active, along with a lot of civil rights attorneys. There were concerns about the civil rights of a lot of different classes of Americans, and it moved into the area of schizophrenia. And statutes were changed almost overnight, state by state, because of the work of civil rights lawyers talking about involuntary hospitalization, involuntary treatment, forcing people to take medication. And there was that was an unconstitutional withholding of liberty, and that was the argument. And state legislatures generally all across the nation were sympathetic to this view, and they changed the statutes to make it extremely hard to commit anybody. And that's still true in California. It's really hard to take somebody who doesn't want to be treated, doesn't want to take medication. It's almost impossible to force them. By forcing, I mean pick them up and hospitalize them and inject them with some antipsychotic medication. For example, in California, the statute is as gravely disabled or danger to self or danger to others. And that has to be tangible evidence. If a family goes to the police or goes to a mental health professional, it's named in the statute, and says, I'm afraid my son is becoming violent, he just picked up a lamp and threw it through the picture window. The answer is, was anybody hurt? Did he harm anybody? No, well, then there's nothing we can do. My daughter is threatening suicide. She's been talking about suicide repeatedly for the last 2 weeks. We're afraid she's going to do it. Has she done it yet? Nope. Well, then there's nothing we can do. There has to be, I'm serious. I'm only exaggerating a little bit here. I'm known for hyperbole, but this is not an occasion. And parents they do this all the time. They hear this all the time. I'm sorry, there's nothing can be done, nothing can do. It doesn't meet the statutory requirement for involuntary treatment. Then there's something called anosognosia. It's a medical term, it's a medical condition. It's when you are suffering from a major illness and you don't know it and you don't believe it. It's a complete and utter denial of being ill. And it's not a ruse. You know, it's not knowing you're ill, but just for a lot of different kinds of reasons, denying it. They don't believe they're ill. And just about every person that has a long history of schizophrenia, in my experience, moves into that stage and then out of the stage and then back into the stage of denying it. And when they deny they have an illness, then of course they're not going to take medication. Why would you take medication for an illness I don't have? I'm not sick, you're sick. Parents hear that all the time. And it really complicates the situation. All right. Think of, there's been a spate of articles in the daily press on homicides by people with psychiatric illness. You read the article, son shoots parents or whatever the heck, this horrifying stuff. And history of psychiatric treatment, history of psychiatric problems is always in there somewhere if there is evidence. And then right at the end of the article, I've got a couple of these I've clipped. Right at the end of the article, what do you read from an enterprising reporter? Press conference by a father or an uncle, a sister, who says, we tried to get help. We did everything we could to get help. We were constantly told there is nothing to be done. So, I'm here to tell you that we need to change the statutes a little bit, just tweak them a little bit, so it becomes a lot easier to involuntarily confine somebody who is seriously ill by any standard of medical care is seriously ill. We need to be able to do that. There's a statute passed in the legislature not too long ago. This is maybe 3-4 years ago, called Laura's Law. I don't know if you've come across it. It's in the press all the time. It allows something called outpatient assistance something. And it is you create a team, family members. Oh, first time that they ever paid any attention to the family. Families with it, counselors, social workers, law enforcement, and they select targets, dozens and dozens of people with schizophrenia who are treatment resistant, and they start working on them. They meet them once a week, they talk to them, they try to bribe them, they try to incent them into treatment. And it works. And once they're in treatment, there's usually some kind of agreement reached with the sufferer, which says, if you will continue to stay in treatment and you will continue to take your medication, I got to say something about medication at some point. Then you can stay in the community. You can live in the community and independently if you want. But if you don't, if you won't keep this contract, you can't live in the community. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're confined to a subacute hospital for 2 or 3 months. In California, any county can take advantage of this statute. There's state money for it, but the county's got to kick in a lot of money too. And you know what the counties are like in terms of money laying around. Yolo County is the only county in California that has moved in this direction. The data look good. Small county, there are a lot of people up there, but boy, it looks good. New York has Kendall's Law, which is very similar. The data out in New York are starting to look very good after just a year. Tennessee has got a similar statute. After 3 years, it's cut the number of homeless people with schizophrenia by half. The number of treatment-resistant people with the disease has been cut by 30, 40%. It's incredibly successful. So we have to move in that direction. And I hope we do. Okay. Let's see. I got about 10 minutes. Let me personalize this a little bit by talking about me. I think of myself in my 20s and 30s. And I was a young father, and I had a lot of responsibilities, and boy, was I going to get an education because I wanted one thing, and that was to be rich. I came from a working class family, not much money in the household, dad often unemployed, didn't graduate from high school. I didn't want anything to do with that. And that was what that was my expectation. And I started a couple of businesses. My colleagues will laugh at this because I'm way on the other side of the saw fence now. But I actually did. I created 2 insurance agencies and got my licenses and started kind of a neat little business. It was unethical as hell, but I made money at it. And that was the guy, I remember him, and I remember that guy really well. And who I am today is so different than that guy. My values are different. What's important to me is different. I've got to the point where things hardly matter. Sometimes I'm teased about the fact that I don't seem to have a thing about things, And it's true. To me, it's what makes the world worth living with is people. And helping others, and the joy that comes from lending a hand with somebody and making a difference. I want to think of myself as contributing something to the world. And it isn't money. It's not foundations. I can remember writing checks to the United Way, for, I don't know, a couple $100 or something, and sending it in. That was my charity. That was compassion. That was my obligation. It was done as soon as I wrote the check. I don't feel that way anymore. I now understand homelessness. I understand the poor. I understand the battles that people have against privilege and disadvantages that would choke the rest of us. And I owe that to my children and my experiences with them. You talk about, if you want to see real compassion, but walk into a mental hospital. Walk into Davis Care Home in Modesto, where my daughter lives. and talk to the staff about compassion and caring for each other. The problem that people with schizophrenia have is hanging on to something they own. It isn't stealing, because if someone needs something, my daughter will say, take my coat. You don't have one. I bought my son a pair of Nikes. Oh, he wanted the swoosh and all that, you know, so we bought a pair, I don't know, $70 or something. Saw him a few weeks later. David, where's your Nikes? He's got his old shoes on. Oh, I can't find him. I lost them. They're lost somewhere. Well, I knew that that wasn't the case. David, what did you do with them? I gave them to John. Why? Dad, John doesn't have any shoes. Well, it's real nice of you. It was a nice gesture, but why did you give him the new ones? Why don't you give him the old ones? And he looked at me with this puzzling expression, and he said, well, Dad, I couldn't do that. Like I'm supposed to understand that you can't do that. People with schizophrenia are victims, they're not perpetrators. People with schizophrenia don't rob banks, they don't embezzle, they don't pull Wall Street shenanigans. My son has been arrested 3 times. Cellophane wrapped sandwich when he was hungry for shoplifting. Pack of cigarettes once, and a Coke. And each day he spent 2 to 3 days in jail before I could get him out. And his only crime was being sick, was being ill, and not understanding what he was doing. You see that kind of thing? I'll never forget walking down from Davis Care Home, you know, that 50s strip of old stores, that old strip mall. Board and care homes where my kids have lived a lot because of the NIMBY thing are always in, you know where they are in cities. And here's a strip mall, and we were walking. When I'm with my daughter, we spend a lot of time just shopping at the discount stores. She likes to buy little things. And all of a sudden, we were walking, and she had my arm, and she jerked my arm. And I said, Karen, what? And then I noticed that there was somebody sitting against the storefront with a little box, you know, panhandling. And she said, Dad, give him some money. Give him some money. You can afford it. You have all the money you need. Now give him some. And she wasn't encouraging me. She was directing me. You damn well give him some money. And I did, of course. And now when I see my daughter, I have a few dollar bills in my pocket, and so that I can hand them out as we walk down the mall. And since that time, I'm one of those guys who hands a 10 or a 20 to somebody on a freeway exit, you know, with a big sign. John Carroll he's a San Francisco columnist. I really like the guy. He's got this concept called the untied way, right? Play on words with United Way, where you're supposed to just give money out and don't worry about what they do with it. And that's real charity. And it is real charity. So I've learned compassion, real compassion, deeds, not words, from watching my son and daughter interact with the people they live with. Beth said something about listening, or I listen well. I got that from my kids too. You don't just listen to the words in the sentences. You look underneath them. What is the whole person trying to tell you? What's coming across? And often with people with schizophrenia, it's hard to figure out what they're talking about because it doesn't make any sense. Often talking with people without schizophrenia, it's also hard to figure out what the hell they're saying. And it helps if you can just listen with an open heart and give them time and so on. I'm much better at listening. I don't know whether Sharon would agree, but or my sister. And it's enhanced my experience in the classroom. I'm worth a hell of a lot more to my students now than I ever was before, just because I could listen to them. Okay, I could go on and on about this. Here I am. In terms of service at St. Mary's College, I often think of my development as a human being going along one channel, and here's St. Mary's right next to it. We're going down the same way. I've been very fortunate to be at St. Mary's. I don't know what I would have done if I had been had a different kind of job where I couldn't just talk to a couple of colleagues quickly and then jump in the car and go find my daughter who's missing from a hospital or something. I don't know what I would have done. It's made all the difference in the world to me. And so it's not surprising I think of you as family. I think of St. Mary's as my second home. So, yeah. Well, we started late, didn't we? So I have another 5 or 10 minutes. I know I want to say something about meds. Thorazine, when it came on and made it easy to dump the people out of the hospitals, Thorazine worked. Terrible side effects, but it worked. Then the neuroleptics came on the scene 20 years later. Great improvements, fewer side effects. In 1993 or 4, clozapine was discovered, an incredibly effective antipsychotic medication. The side effects are nowhere near as bad as they used to be. So we're in a better position to medicate people without making them suffer in a sense of side effects or so on. I mean, zombie-like behavior from medication is a thing of the past, completely. All right, so you want to do something for 5 minutes? You want to ask a question, or somebody want to say something? And I hate it when I talk forever like this. Anybody want to share something or ask a question? Nobody wants the spotlight, huh? Yes, Kristen.
How long is the typical lifespan of someone with schizophrenia? It used to be much shorter because it often ended in suicide.
12 years. On average, people with schizophrenia live 12 fewer years than people without schizophrenia. That's a male figure, by the way. For females, it's around 6. And, who knows why. Now that I think of 12 years, I think of 12%, which is the number of people with schizophrenia who kill themselves, is 12%. The number of people who try to commit suicide, probably half the population, including my son. So we ought to be taking this stuff seriously. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I know this is a personal question, but sitting here
Well, it doesn't bother me if it's personal.
listening to you.
Go right ahead.
I worked a year at Napa State Hospital.
Wow.
So I'm very aware of what you're saying. But
Uh-huh.
I guess this question I would ask you is, what do you do with the grief that you have?
What do I do with that?
Grief. Do you grieve that they suffer, that they haven't had opportunities that they might?
Do I grieve? Is that was the word? I'm sorry. My left ear plug conked, so I can't
Grieve.
grieve.
What do you do with your grief?
Your grief.
Got it. Thank you. There were times when I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. There were times when I couldn't stop crying. I can give you personal anecdotes of, which were very painful for me, and no different for Sandra, their mother. You get to a point where you realize that this is the world. It's the way it is. Am I going to help my son and daughter if I feel sorry for myself and sob all night and stay up and don't take care of myself? No, I'm of no use to them at all. So you get to a point where you have to take care of yourself so you can take care of them. I'm no martyr, believe me. It's a sad business. God was having a really bad day when He created this illness. Let me tell you. Yeah, and there was a hand over here.
Yeah, first I just wanted to say how grateful I am to talk about this so openly and in such a substantial manner, because it's not something that people willingly talk about. It's hidden a lot, and it's still probably after all these years attacking people. And I think it's really
Yeah, well,
normalized it
It's not much different than any other social issue that needs attention. Write letters, call your congressman, write the Chronicle, go to a community meeting, educate yourself about something like Laura's Law and become a speaker. There's nothing magic about it. Well, in terms of your own personal salvation, if that's the right word, I'm a great believer in helping out as a way of making yourself feel good about yourself. That's for sure. Yes, Barbara. Hi.
Building on that, what do you think we could do for people we know who have children who are schizophrenic? I have a friend whose daughter is schizophrenic, and she actually came and burned her mother's house down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And is periodically threatening in and out of places, and she's dealing with this all the time. And many more people are affected by this. I learned more through her
Oh,
than
yeah.
anyone knows because there's so many. What do we do to help the people who are like in your position?
Well, if they're not already members, the first thing you should do is go to a chapter meeting of the National Association of Mental Illness California, NAMI California. Wonderful organization, saved my life at one period. And the reason is because you sit around with parents who have the same problem you do. And you share. It's not, how hard is this? We all know this, right? Nobody understands what's going on except somebody who suffers along with you, which is for largely the same reasons. So get them to go to a CAMI meeting. Take them. They're the most wonderful folks. It's a wonderful organization. Go to their website, California Alliance for the Mentally Ill. They have all kinds of resources, pamphlets, books. Oh my gosh. That reminds me, I've got a handout somewhere that if you want to take it with you, it's on the myths of schizophrenia, and there's a couple of references at the bottom. There's a Bible that a guy wrote this book. It's a phenomenal book for families. Buy him a copy. E. Fuller Torrey, Surviving Schizophrenia. He's a guru to families. Well, shall we wrap it up? Yes, Jody?
Thank you for thinking of us as family. We think of you as family too.
I'm sorry, I can't. All right. Let's go get something to eat. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.